Robots? Mere toys. Neuroamps? Good for parlor tricks. The colony war may have made implants and upgrades available to veterans, but you once saw a greater future. Humans and machines as one. So, reading the official description of the Cyberneticist, one can immediately conjure up several examples from pop culture. The Borg from Star Trek, Darth Vader from Star Wars, and countless others. This is good, both because it gives us subject matter to draw from in our own builds, and because our subconscious creativity may be preceded with cool gameplay ideas and roleplay beats to play off of. My interpretation of the Cyberneticist, of course, included the laser weapon skill along with medicine, both of which helped us through the end game. I also added all kinds of crafting skills to make sure we were using the best possible gear at all times. On top of that, I tacked on the diplomacy social skill, which allows us to manipulate enemies through the scanner. This part of the build was inspired by Cyberpunk 2077's Quickhacks, where malware is basically uploaded directly to your enemy's cyberware to get them to behave in certain ways. I made very heavy use of the boost pack for this build, vastly expanding mobility and furthering the idea of the Cyberneticist melding his tech with his body. Chemistry is also heavily leveraged in this build, allowing us to craft pharmaceuticals that will help to temporarily mitigate any weaknesses resulting from not taking anything from the physical skill category. This reinforces the idea that the Cyberneticist is physically weak and frail, but becomes formidable through tech. This helps the build to stay usable all the way through New Game Plus 10. So, this build provides plenty of firepower through combat and crafting skills, mobility via boost packs, remote hacking via the scanner, and massive temporary buffs through chems. This is some great gameplay diversity here, and I think it still fits the bill of the official description provided for this background. And all of this is ready to go at level 50, so it's also efficient. If this build sounds interesting to you, grab your favorite flavor of chunks and watch on. For background, we're taking the Cyberneticist, obviously. I hope. The traits become a bit more interesting because they do have gameplay ramifications as well as enable some nice roleplay opportunities. So I went with the United Colonies Native, Terra Firma, and Introvert. The UC Native perk was mostly because our main crafting hub was in the Lodge in New Atlantis. The Lodge also gives us free access to a bed, and as the headquarters of the main faction, we'll be spending a lot of time there. It enables more dialogue options while you're here and gives you some better monetary rewards when you complete some of the quests located in UC areas. If you're not a fan of the UC origin, you can take Freestar Collective Settler by roleplaying that your character was a master mech pilot before they were outlawed, and now he's trying to recreate that experience by adding cyberware directly to his body. Or if you prefer the Neon Street Rat, you could roleplay your character as a Ryujin engineer that was acting as their own lab rat, testing their creations on their own body. Terra Firma is a strong trait to choose for almost any build, since you're going to be spending the vast majority of your time and doing the vast majority of your fighting on solid ground. So you'll get plenty of use out of the boosted health and oxygen while on a planet's surface, and the nerf you incur in space will have much less of an impact. The introvert trait was one that I changed my mind on several times. The roleplay arc that I chose with this character was one where as their level grew, they gained power through installing more and more cyberware. This leads them to losing more and more of their humanity throughout the playthrough, with more direct dialogue choices, less humor, making pragmatic decisions rather than personal choices, and things like that. This would include choosing not to take on a human follower, which would activate the oxygen buff you get from this trait and avoid the debuff from having a human companion with you. The struggle I had with this decision is that there is lots of awesome content tied to all the followers in this game. I'd encourage you to explore all of it if you haven't already. Each of the main followers in Constellation are bursting with personality and have a deeply personal story to tell, and they're all well worth experiencing. The introvert trait is in direct opposition to this, but this gives us a roleplay opportunity. Once you've had your fill of New Game Plus and your character has successfully debugged the multiverse to an acceptable degree, you can have them retire in a way in one universe. At this point, they can take on the goal of regaining their humanity. You can start taking more humorous dialogue options, making more personal decisions rather than always taking the pragmatic one, and start taking on some followers and reforging some relationships. The game does have a built-in mechanic for removing traits, so when you're ready, you can visit the House of the Enlightened in the Well at New Atlantis and talk to the guy there to open up your heart to others. So, following this method, you could potentially have to wait a very long time to experience the follower content, but you do get to experience it. In any case, I've found that the trait effects don't really have much of a significant impact on gameplay, even at the hardest difficulties. They just either aren't strong enough or don't affect attributes that have much weight for this build, so it becomes more roleplay flavor than anything, so feel free to pick what appeals to you here. As mentioned in the intro, this is a level 50 build, but with the unique New Game Plus mechanic in Starfield, the soft cap that existed around level 50 in other BGS games has effectively been removed. However, we have to cap the build somewhere in order to keep it concise enough for one moderately sized video, so I'm going to focus on the skills you'll want to take for your first 50 levels, and briefly point out some of the ones that will be useful if you continue to keep playing beyond that. Please be advised that these skills are presented in left to right order, not necessarily the order in which you should take them. Try to always take the skill that'll either make the most immediate impact or enable other impactful skills later in the category. Let's start with the social tree. I took all 4 ranks of the scavenging skill, which gives some extra credits, ammo, and aid items in containers. It also highlights marked resources in the scanner view. In my experience, credits are already plentiful, and ammo, aid, and resources are all cheap enough that these skills make little difference in the end. However, we did need to spend 4 points somewhere in this category to get access to the good stuff in the next tier, and scavenging did seem to be the most useful for this build. Then I took all 4 ranks of diplomacy, which allow us to calm an enemy through the scanner. Each rank allows you to calm higher and higher level enemies, and the last one makes the effect permanent. A word of warning here, this skill only provides a chance to calm an enemy. It doesn't work consistently by design. This gives us a techie kind of thing to do with our scanner in combat, adding gameplay diversity to the build. This ability can make some normally tough fights quite trivial, although I found that at higher character levels and New Game Plus loops, the chance to calm seems to get smaller and smaller. Beyond level 50, I'd suggest looking into Outpost Management if you want to play with the building system, and Ship Command will allow you to add to your ship crew, which does make you stronger in space combat. You might be tempted to invest points in the instigation and manipulation skills, but I found fiddling with multiple options in the scanner menu during combat to be really cumbersome. It's easier from stealth if you want to go that route, but this isn't meant to be a stealthy build. Next, on to combat skills. The Cyberneticist starts with a rank in the laser skill, and I ended up taking the other 3 as well. Laser weapons will be the main method of damage output for this build, so this is a no-brainer. You'll want to do the most damage possible when you start fighting high-level endgame enemies, and this skill is essential for that. The damage boost from this skill will apply to both pure laser weapons and the energy damage portion of particle beam weapons such as the Big Bang and Varun weapons. I also took all 4 ranks of the rifle certification in the next tier. This allows us to double dip on damage boosts for laser rifles such as the Equinox and Orion, as well as the Varun Inflictor at higher levels. Beyond level 50, you can maximize your damage output by investing in the pistol certification skill for the Solstice and Varun Starshard guns, or the shotgun certification skill to bolster the Big Bang weapon. Your skill points also likely won't go to waste in particle beams, as that'll boost the damage output of the deadliest weapons in the game. My advice here for weapon certification skills is to let your rare, epic, and legendary drops guide you. If you find an awesome epic Big Bang, go for shotgun certification. If you find a Varun Starshard with some amazing legendary effects, go with pistol certification. The marksmanship skill is another great way to increase damage of all non-automatic weapons through higher crit chance. And all 3 skills in the final tier are worth taking for this build. Armor penetration will increase damage by ignoring armor, crippling is great for crowd control, and sharpshooter is a no-brainer if you're good at clicking heads. Let's move on now to the science tree. Medicine is another skill that has its first rank provided by the Cyberneticist background. It happens to be quite useful, so I took all 4 ranks in it. This boosts the amount of health each healing item restores, and at rank 4 restores it faster and has a chance to cure an affliction. Since we're not boosting our defense with any physical skills, we'll have low health and not much in the way of inherent damage reduction. so that makes healing even more important for this build. Once you've spent 4 points, you'll have access to the next tier, where I took all 4 ranks of weapons engineering and 3 ranks of spacesuit design. This will enable you to craft more mods for all weapons and armor in the game. Rank 4 in spacesuit design simply reduces material costs of mods, but in my experience I never really found myself hurting too bad for resources, so I just saved the point for other things. In the next tier, I took 3 ranks of chemistry, which gives you access to all craftable pharmaceuticals in the game. Some of these are very powerful but require rare ingredients. I'll go into some more detail on this in the gear section later in the video. And then in the 4th tier, we only need the first rank of special projects, which will open up research projects for the final and most powerful weapon and armor mods. Beyond level 50, you might want to prioritize getting all of the ranks of this skill. Some of the more powerful mods will require some rare components, and you can find these at vendors, but being able to craft them from more common components will save you a bunch of time and frustration in tracking these resources down. Also, concerning spacesuit design, it's really important at higher levels and high difficulty to be able to upgrade your armor. As mentioned, we aren't taking any skills in the physical category, so our HP pool will be quite small and will have no inherent damage reduction. Aside from med packs and Starborn abilities, the resistances provided by our spacesuit will be our last form of defense, so improving it is a must. Beyond level 50, you might consider both outpost engineering and planetary habitation if you plan on diving into the outpost building system in this game. And fittingly, our biggest skill category will be tech. The Cyberneticist background comes with 1 rank in the security skill, which helps with accessing locked doors and containers. In my experience though, the rewards you get for unlocking anything in this game are extremely disappointing. This skill can open up alternative paths in some dungeons, but as this is not a stealth build, the usefulness of that is really limited. So at least for level 50, I wouldn't recommend putting any more points into this one. You'll also want to take 1 rank of piloting, which enables you to use thrusters to drift in spaceflight. This provides some important maneuverability in space combat. I also took 1 point in the targeting control system skill, which simply enables the ship weapons system skills later in the category. There are a few parts in this game that will force you into space combat, which is much harder than normal combat in my experience. So investing some points in the ship skills is extremely important in providing a successful endgame build, just in case you're wondering why there are so many ship skills in a Cyberneticist build. Boost pack training is another important skill for this build, and I took all 4 ranks. This makes our boosts more efficient and boost regen faster so we can spend more time in the air. And then in tier 2, I took all 4 ranks in shield systems, vastly increasing survivability in space combat. In tier 3, I took all 4 ranks of particle beam weapons systems. Particle beams will do damage in equal parts to enemy shields and hulls, making this the most efficient offensive ship skill. I replaced all weapon slots in each ship with the stronger particle beam weapons, which allowed me to just melt enemy ships. I also took 2 ranks in the robotics skill, which allows us to use the scanner to pacify or fear enemy robots. We'll also now do more damage to robots and turrets. This fits really well with the things that a Cyberneticist is supposed to be able to do and add some gameplay diversity to the build. And finally, in tier 4, I took all 4 ranks in boost assault training. This allows us to ignite and knock down enemies when we boost near them, allows us to hover in the air until we're out of boost meter, and also slows down time while we're hovering. This is the single most impactful skill in terms of gameplay and absolutely integral to this build concept. And then beyond level 50, space combat is only going to get harder, so you'll want to invest some skill points in piloting, which will allow you to pilot more powerful Class B and C ships. Targeting control systems will allow you to lock onto enemy ships faster and increase damage to them once they're locked. Starship design is absolutely essential for the shipbuilding system in the game, and it will allow you to create some absolute monstrosities that pre-built ships just can't compete with. And for the longer, more drawn-out space battles toward the end of some quest lines, Starship engineering will repair your ship at a faster pace, allowing you to stay in the fight longer. Gear works differently in this game. In Skyrim, I could tell you exactly which unique artifacts to track down and which effects to apply to self-enchanted pieces. However, Starfield is more like Diablo or a looter shooter with its random loot system. There are a few items that you can find at vendors and receive as quest rewards that have static effects, but for the most part they're all random. So it's hard for me to tell you exactly what equipment to go for in this game, since you may never see them, and you may also run into things that are much better. Generally, for armor, the higher the ballistic energy and EM resistance numbers are, the better. These numbers are usually more important than any special effects attached to the item. I generally took the same approach with weapons as well, favoring regular advanced tier weapons over rare, epic, and legendary weapons that do less pure damage. Weapon effects such as instigating, shattering, and 1-inch punch can break this pattern, however. All that being said, here are a few armor sets that are statically placed even though the effects attached to them are completely random. First up is the Starborn spacesuit. You get a new variant at the start of every New Game Plus run. It's a free legendary suit with 3 random effects. It has great well-rounded resistances that scale with New Game Plus loops up to 10, and it's some of the best looking gear in the game. However, it won't hold up against found level gear in the long run. You can't upgrade or modify it, and you only get 3 total effects since it is technically only one item. Next up is the Mantis set. You get 3 leveled legendary armor items with 3 random effects each. It is upgradable and moddable, and is available fairly early on, and only requires a single dungeon dive, although it's kinda long. The only downside is that you'll eventually be able to find better gear later in the game, and it can look kinda goofy. Finally, we have the Anti-Xeno set. It's stronger and cooler looking than the Mantis set. It is also upgradable and moddable, but it requires doing most of the UC Vanguard questline, which can take quite a long time. I generally use the same mods for each piece of gear. On the spacesuit, I like to use ballistic shielding, explosive shielding, heavy shielding, and pocketed. On the helmet, I usually used ballistic shielding, explosive shielding, heavy shielding, and gravitic composites. And on the pack, I'd normally go with extra capacity, medic, and balanced boost pack. The balanced boost pack gives us a great combination of height and efficiency, keeping us up and out of melee range for as long as possible using the boost assault training skill to hover above the battlefield. Now, there are some ways to re-roll item effects by reloading to a save from before the area containing the item was loaded. Ultimately though, the most important thing is the resistances, which are going to be great on most advanced and superior items. Just try to keep a balanced distribution of ballistic and energy resistance, favoring ballistic if you have to go one way or the other, just because most enemies in the game will be using ballistic weapons. Coupled with crafted upgrades, the reactive shield power, and aid items that provide a multiplicative increase in damage resistances, I had no problem with survivability with any legendary effect, or even no legendary effect at all. So I just took whatever effects the RNG gods gave me on the first load. For weapons to look for, first on the list is the Orion, which gives us a long to mid-range option. My first order of business on a New Game Plus run is to cash in everything from the Lodge basement and whatever Sarah gives me for joining, and buy an advanced Orion. You can find these at either Centurion Arms in the residential district or UC Surplus in the Well. This one has the base damage and the range to carry you through most New Game Plus runs, though closer to New Game Plus 10, enemies will start getting a little more spongy and you'll be better served by a particle beam weapon. However, getting the right rare, epic, or legendary effects on this one could keep this viable even on New Game Plus 10. For the mods I typically use on the Orion, I went with the long barrel, recon laser sight, recon scope, focus nozzle, stabilizing stock, ignition beams, and amplifier. Next up, for the mid to short range laser weapon option, you can go with an Equinox. The Equinox is fine for early to mid game, but because it caps out at the refined tier, probably due to a bug, it falls off pretty hard pretty quickly. You can find this one at most weapons vendors fairly easily though. This gun can be modded to be fully automatic, which is nice for the stacking fire effect, but will never match the cutter for the same effect. And the perks we've taken for this build heavily favor non-automatic rifles over anything automatic. So at a certain point, it was hard to find a use case for this one that either an advanced Orion or the cutter couldn't handle better. Though you may find a good legendary one that you might want to use for longer. Mods I typically put on this one were recon laser sight, recon scope, stealth lasers, ignition beams, amplifier, and overclocked. A much better mid to short range option is the Varun Inflictor or Star Shard particle beam weapons. These ones are really rare, but they do occasionally show up in the basement of the lodge or as a welcome gift from Sarah for joining Constellation in a New Game Plus run, and even in vendor inventories from time to time. But because they are so rare, it's hard to base a build off of. If, however, you do run across these, definitely add them to your arsenal, as they are some of the most powerful weapons in the game. For the typical mods I'd use on the Inflictor, I went with the Long Barrel, Recon Laser Sight, Reflex Sight, Focus Nozzle, Annihilator Rounds, and Amplifier. And for Star Shard mods, I typically go with the Long Barrel, Recon Laser Sight, Reflex Sight, Focus Nozzle, Annihilator Rounds, Amplifier, and Burst Fire. And at short range, a great option is the Big Bang. Because this one is a shotgun and not a rifle, our perk spread will only touch the energy damage portion of this particle beam weapon. That being said, at short range, the Big Bang will still outpunch even the Orion in terms of damage output. So this one is definitely worth adding to your arsenal once it's available. It also scales up to advanced tier, so it's more effective than the Equinox even at mid-range. This one is commonly available at weapons vendors once you reach a certain level, so it might be worth it to grab one at the beginning of a New Game Plus run once you can afford it. For mods that I typically put on the Big Bang, I went with the Extended Barrel, Recon Laser Sight, Reflex Sight, Double Barrel Muzzle, Ergonomic Stock, Annihilator Rounds, and Amplifier. And for our final short-range backup option, the Cutter. The very first weapon you get in the game starts off fairly weak, and while you cannot upgrade it at Laser Certification Rank 4, it does become one of the most powerful weapons in the game. This is because the high rate of fire used to simulate the beam effect procs the flame effect from the perk very quickly, and it stacks for ridiculously high damage over time after holding the beam on your target for a few seconds. This synergy is so potent you could create an entire build from it, and many have. But for the Cyberneticist build, since he is so physically frail, he favors keeping a little distance and not fighting point blank. But as a short-range backup weapon for when you're out of ammo, or when a melee enemy does finally close the distance, the Cutter is hard to beat. Now, a quick word about legendary effects. For the most part, you'll want to favor the pure damage output you get from the advanced tier weapons over most legendary effects. However, unlike the armor effects, weapons effects in this game can have a large impact on damage number and gameplay in general. Effects such as Skip Shot, Assassin, 1-inch Punch, and Shattering may end up giving more damage on a lower tier weapon, so make sure to take a look at that before just selling it off immediately or using it blindly. Now let's talk about pharmaceuticals. The temporary buffs you get from the various pharmaceuticals is a very underused mechanic in this game. They can provide huge buffs to damage output and resistance, and they can also provide other useful effects such as boosts to Sneak, Persuasion, and even Starborn Power regen. For this character, I roleplayed pharmaceutical chems as injectable nanomachines used to heal and to augment various aspects of his physiology. Moving on now to specific chems that I would use, let's first talk about med, trauma, and emergency packs. Since I didn't invest any skill points in the physical tree, being able to heal was really important. Unfortunately, we can't craft healing chems in this game, so make sure to buy them whenever you get the chance, especially early in the game. Later on, once you have some upgraded armor and access to reactive shield and some other chems, you'll be using much less healing items and you'll be more able to sustain your supply through scavenging. Next up is the Supermassive Black Heart. This is the ultimate craftable pharmaceutical in the game. This will give you plus 500% power recovery, plus 50% damage output, and plus 75% movement speed for 10 seconds. It also slows time by 50% for 10 seconds, effectively making all this last for 20 seconds instead of 10. You'll need chemistry skill level 3 in order to make these, as well as alien genetic material, the neurologic resource, and coelamite. Alien genetic material can be found on boss level alien fauna, you know, the ones with multiple life bars, so make sure to take some time out to slaughter some sweet innocent wildlife every now and then. Neurologic is very rare, but can be found at vendors where other resources are sold. You may have to sleep a few times in New Atlantis to refresh vendor inventories, but you'll eventually find them at Jemison Mercantile or the UC Distribution Center in New Atlantis. Coelamite can also rarely be found at vendors, but they're all over the place wherever you find an artifact underground. So make sure to take the time to mine all that up whenever you pick one up. Everything else is pretty readily available. You should know though that there are some hoops to jump through before you can create these. Supermassive black hearts require a giant heart to craft, which requires a dwarf star heart to craft. These are only available from crafting and require 2 and 1 skill points in chemistry respectively. Frostwolf is another great chem that can be crafted using different ingredients that might be more widely available. You'll still need chemistry rank 3 to be able to craft them, but they only require a recon stim, whiteout, and tetrafluorides to craft, which are more widely available at vendors and in general loot. As mentioned earlier, since ship combat is unavoidable and since it's so difficult compared to normal combat, you really need to pay attention to your ship as part of any build in this game. Getting into shipbuilding is best, but if you don't want to take the plunge, you should at least be making regular upgrades to weapons, shields, and engines as soon as they become available. The Razor Leaf is far from the strongest ship in the game, but it's much better than the Frontier starter ship and can be obtained fairly early on in the playthrough. This ship should also be upgraded regularly, and since this build concentrates on the particle beam weapon skill, you should make it a point to swap out all of your weapon slots with the best particle beams you can afford. The Star Eagle is even better than the Razor Leaf, but you do have to complete the whole Freestar Collective quest line in order to obtain it. Even if the base ship is a great upgrade, you still need to regularly upgrade the components to keep it viable in battle as you level up. And just like with the Razor Leaf, make sure to swap the weapon slots out with particle beam weapons as soon as you can to maximize your damage output. When you step through Unity and emerge in the next New Game Plus universe, you are given a new upgraded Starborn Guardian ship to use up to New Game Plus 7, at which point the ship stops getting stronger in subsequent New Game Plus runs. This ship is not as good as something that you can build and upgrade yourself through conventional means, but it is by far the best Class A ship you can get, at least in my experience, in terms of how much damage the hull can withstand and how many light years the ship can jump. This ship got me all the way through New Game Plus without too much issue. Since there is already so much going on with the gameplay between weapon switching, boost pack maneuvering, the diplomacy scanner skill, and pharmaceuticals, I kept the power use pretty basic with this build. I mostly used reactive shield mainly as a way to boost damage resistance since the Cyberneticist is so physically frail. Combined with upgraded gear, the damage resistance with this build was plenty to keep me from getting mauled on very hard difficulty all the way through New Game Plus 10. I also occasionally used anti-gravity field as an oh crap button for when I was surrounded by enemies in close quarters. This would hang up all enemies in the blast radius like a bunch of broken marionettes, allowing for plenty of time to cull the herd a bit. You can also use the supermassive black heart chem mentioned earlier in the gear section to vastly speed up the regen on your power meter, basically allowing you to rapid fire some of them. There are tons of different powers in this game, and I admittedly haven't fully explored all of them yet, so if you can think of any more that would work well with this build, please do let me know in the comments. There were several combat tactics that I employed throughout this playthrough. After a while, I started to refine them into a repeatable sort of routine that resembles a playstyle, and I will walk you through that now. The first thing to do when entering combat is to make sure your weapons are all fully loaded and equip the one with the most range. This will enable the tactical weapon switch method that I'll cover in just a bit. Next, cast the reactive shield power as soon as possible. This will boost your damage resistance greatly, which is very useful with the low health pool this build carries. And then go ahead and fire on your enemy. Keep an eye on your magazine though. As you run out of ammo, you'll have a decision to make. If the enemies are still at long distance using suppressive fire, you can find cover and reload your long-range weapon. At this point, you can just continue to pick targets off at range. If enemies are now aggressively closing that distance, it's time to employ the tactical weapon switch procedure. The tactical weapon switch works off the fact that switching weapons in this game is much faster than reloading your current weapon, even with points in the skill. This allows us to not take any ranks in the reload skill and save those skill points for something else. I like to arrange my hotkeys in a way that I can progress from long to mid to short range weapons and finally to the cutter as the enemy approaches, without having to even think about it. Following this weapon switching progression, I've had very little need to reload in combat, and when I did have to, this method bought me plenty of time to at least find some cover where I could take the time I needed to reload all of my weapons and start the progression over. At any point in this process, if you encounter a tough boss enemy that you're having trouble with, you can consume a supermassive black heart chem for a damage boost, more damage resistance, Starborn meter regen, and a slow time effect. And as the enemy gets closer, perform one jet boost into the air and aim down sights to hover. This will take you out of melee range and might burn and or knock nearby enemies to the ground, buying you some time and space to reestablish your offense. This will also make you more of a target for ranged enemies, so be sure to keep your reactive shield up. I found the balanced pack to work best for this because it provides the most, well, balance between height and the time you can spend hovering in the air with the boost assault training skill. I had a lot of fun with the roleplay on this character. For the first game run, I played it as if I were a normal human. No jokes, please. I was sociable, empathetic, and funny, and I reflected that in my dialogue selections and with the choices presented in some of the quest lines. Then, as I went through several New Game Plus runs and leveled up, the character started to lose his sense of humor, charm, and humanity. I roleplayed this as installing more cybernetics in his body and more nanomachines, or chems, in his bloodstream. He started to lose some of what made him human. I always played him as a good guy, but later on in the playthrough, bringing bad guys to justice and eliminating threats and righting various wrongs of the galaxy was more about debugging the faulty code of reality and less about any true human empathy or sense of belonging or justice. And with the enhanced shops around the galaxy, you can make these changes to the character manifest physically as well. He loses his hair and skin pigment as a side effect of the various procedures he's undergone. He loses weight and becomes frail. His eyes become dark and sunken. It can be quite a striking change or one that happens gradually throughout the playthrough. Either way, it's quite a satisfying way to get deeper into the character, and I highly recommend it. And then, just as the Pilgrim describes in his journal, the Cyberneticist begins to miss that sense of belonging. And so, after New Game Plus 10, or however many times you want to go through the Unity with this character, he decides to settle down and call one universe home. It was in this run that I began to introduce more humor back into his dialogue choices and pay more attention to the human emotional impact of my choices in the game. I started building ships and outposts and buying apartments that I'd call home. I also started forging relationships with companions again. And it was all the more meaningful this time after so many New Game Plus runs because I knew this was going to be the universe I stayed in indefinitely. All these things were now permanent again, and that made it feel like it was actually worthwhile this time. It's a great option that this game uniquely provides. And that does it for my first Starfield build guide. I hope to do more of these once I can figure out how to make more efficient use of my time in the game. I suspect they'll start going faster now that I know more about the game and I'm not experiencing everything for the first time. But I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it helped you to get more out of the game. If it did, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's free and it helps my channel out a ton. People have used the description "wide as an ocean but deep as a puddle" to describe this game. What many don't remember is that the same criticism was leveraged against Skyrim and Fallout 4 and even Oblivion before that, and people are still playing those games a ton. The point here is that there is depth to be found in these games if you're willing to actively put a bit of yourself into it, and in doing so, you'll end up having some of the most satisfying experiences in gaming. But as always, if I have missed something, gotten something wrong, or if you just have a comment or suggestion about this build or the channel, let me know in the comments below. I love discussing this stuff. And with that, take care and see you next time.